Hello? Oh, good. Thank you very much, Porto Academy. Thank you very much, Emilia and Rodrigo. Thank you very much, Rui. We are very happy to be here.
Yes, it's really fantastic, and thank you very much to our students and to all the other students. Our work starts with a dilemma. We love the city. We love streets, squares, facades, and complex, rich interiors. We love history, continuity, and time in architecture. We love the refined urban architecture. But whenever we build or design a building for a place, we find ourselves not in the city center and not in the countryside, but in a blurry, fragmented, and undefined in-between. This dilemma is central to our work.
When we, can you go back one? When we, after we finished our first building, we were very happy and we thought that's really going to show us the future. We looked out at our bank account and we saw it was empty. We were broke. So we were participating on a competition for a large office building, and 2 weeks before, or a few weeks before the submission, a private client called us and asked us whether we would like to enter a private competition. So while we were working on something, on an office building that vaguely recalled this fantastic Palazzo Borromeo by Piero Ligorio in Rome, where we took the composition of a horizontal line in the middle of the building with a vertical piece creating a kind of cross figure. We took that as a base for our office building. When we dropped that competition to do the small private competition, we recycled that idea.
It's a bit our Y2K house moment, no? You all know the myth about the Casa da Musica, that OMA was working on a little house for a client that was paranoid and was very worried about the year 2000 bug. And the project died, and they had the competition for the Casa da Musica, and they took everything and put it in there. So it's a very little house in a suburban area of Basel. It's about 10 minutes from Basel train station. It's a 3-story building with 3 apartments.
So the basic idea that you can recognize that we took from the facade is that there's a central element. It's like a motive of a main window with another that's expanded visually with another window hanging from its belly. It's a technique, an idea of tectonics, of a hanging tectonics that we have learned from Michelangelo, who did that a lot. And the idea of that is creating the same cross figure together with a horizontal line, with a horizontal line that is dividing the gray area from the white area. So that idea of having a central motive we discovered allowed us to accommodate the chaotic nature of the rest of the project. It's as if a center would kind of create a center of gravity while everything else would be all right the way it is.
When we design facades, we always look at the volume in a planar way. We don't try to look at it over the corner. And with this building, we made every facade almost different. This is more like a shield that contains the loggias. The back facade is more free flow. And the facade to the street is very figural and plastic.
Of course, it's the main paradox of architecture that you're doing volumes that are at the same time composed of planes. So is it planes or is it volumes? Or is it volumes or is it planes?
The plan is very simple. It's divided in 2 parts. There's a big living room and the bedrooms are in the back. There is a central pillar that unites an extra room that you can connect with the living room or you can have it open. It's the windows itself define areas that structure the space. And then we were super happy with the project. Huh? The client was super happy. We submitted the building permit. They came back very quickly. And 2 weeks later, we received a letter. The client received a letter from the municipality saying, when we digitized the zoning plan, we made a mistake. You don't have a B2 zone, but you have a B3 zone.
So the client called us and he asked, you know, Oliver and Thomas, is that a good message or a bad message? Is that good news or bad news? We said, it's good news, of course.
It's 70% more area on the site. That was a huge problem for us because we...
I think it's me. I think...
You want to switch?
Yeah.
It was a huge problem for us because we were so happy with the first project, and it had, you saw it had a nice vertical volume, it was very figural, had presence, and we ended up with something that was more like this. It was very horizontal, a bit too big for the neighborhood. It had all of a sudden 5 apartments instead of 3, and it raised a lot of questions about collectiveness and expression in a building like that. Like, it's not a real apartment building, but then it is an apartment building. The plan went from this to this.
So what happened is that you recognize there again this kind of chaotic sense of, you know, cellular rooms and angular walls and all that stuff, but there are also these pillars. And these pillars have now a slightly different function. They're also about centering space, but they're also about connecting space. In this case, you see that they are creating a center of a common space, of a common living space. At the same time, they're separating the living area from a kind of winter garden and a loggia, which is an outside space. So while all the spaces are, architecturally speaking, interior spaces, some of them are in reality half outside and half inside spaces. So this pillar does an interesting thing. It connects all the spaces while also it separates them. And to make the point, one of these pillars is load-bearing, is structural, and the other one is hollow, so it's architecture.
The facade, the main facade that was the garden facade in the project before became the main facade on the street side.
Recycling.
It lost a bit of frame, but it still has this central motif. We also made it slightly higher, put that line down in order to lift the gravity of the facade in a zone, say like this. So it's a real piano nobile. Huh? And from that piano nobile, there's windows hanging from that line.
You know, because of the fundamental problem of a small multifamily dwelling is that you don't have enough stories, enough repetition to create an idea of collectiveness. Huh? So, you know, you have just 2 stories. It's really stupid. You know, is this a single family house or is it something collective? So what do? And it's the same apartments, just rental stuff, you know, rental apartments. So what we decided to do is to only in the facade to create a difference and to create a motif where the top floor becomes the piano nobile and the other windows are kind of attached to it. So there's a hierarchy in the facade that does not exist inside the building, besides having that the ground floor has a different relationship to the ground than the top floor.
On the side facades, this motif was just repeated in a free way, in a free rhythm that allowed just enough stability to introduce exceptions where needed. Goes around the corner and stops with another symmetric element. The back facade is free flow again. It was very clear, you know, we have quite normal clients that invest their money and want the maximum out of it. So it was clear that we would not spend a lot of money on the facade. And also we had to make sure that the thickness of the wall wouldn't be too deep because of the areas within the building. So it was very clear from the beginning that this is going to be an outer installation facade. So it's basically styrofoam with 5 millimeters of plaster on top. We actually quite embrace this condition, and we thought, right, if this is a planar building, it's composed out of planes. It's a bit like origami, you know. It's a plane. It gets folded. It becomes very plastic, but it's very fine and thin, and its surface in tension.
So if you think that styrofoam stuff is a curse, is a terrible thing, because of its thinness, of its lack of substance, of weight, no? Then we said, you know, the only way we can work it if we really embrace that. So these elements that you see around the window, they're all folded metal. They're all made of two-dimensional metal sheets that are folded like origami to create something that is three-dimensional but not massive.
And whereas here it's part of a relief that is in the facade, it's on the entrance it became very volumetric and very figural as well. And yeah, well, it's an interesting discovery that when you work with symmetry, with ideas of a piano nobile, with kind of classical language of architecture, but you do it in a way that is where you set a tone that is not about heaviness or mass or gravity. You're in a world where you can say things with quite a different with a different tone, no? With a lightness, huh? But the things you say are very serious.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I'm German, you know, and when we say something serious, we say it with a serious tone in our voice, you know, to make sure you all understand. Huh? But there are other cultures, like maybe the British culture, they can say very serious things with a light tone in their voice. People still understand, huh? So it doesn't have the heaviness of it. So I think in architectures, it is similar. There's a sense, there's a layer of meaning and expression, and then there's another question of how you express that, which tone you find of what you want to say.
The plan cost a lot of trouble for us. It's one thing, the municipality had such a bad conscience that they fucked up with the building laws, that they told us a trick. If you have a winter garden, and on the floor above you put a loggia, and you know, kind of in a chess figure way, you get both areas for free. But this caused the problem of having a living room that has only a real facade here, or connection to the facade, and it's kind of deep in the plan, and it has adjacent two kind of outdoor rooms. So these pillars that we put in, they actually work as a spatial gravity center to connect, but also to separate the spaces.
And all these circumstances, they led to a plan that has no typological clarity, no, that's really a mess. You know, columns, angular walls, cellular rooms, all that kind of stuff, all shoved together. And then there's a kind of a facade, you know, wrapped around that.
But since we're in an Alvaro Caesar building, we can also have an Alvaro Caesar quote, no? Caesar says, good buildings have... Alvaro Caesar, but I want to do a quote first. Caesar says, good buildings have ugly plans. Now you should clap. It's a good one, huh? Good buildings have ugly plans. Huh? The windows to the outside and the windows to the inside, that caused us quite a headache. The way how you structure that architecturally, how you're not just looking at bloody glazed windows. I have to be careful, we have window sponsors here, you know? Where you just look at your grill and at your outside furniture and all that stuff, but like how you make rooms out of these things.
So we were looking at the Laurentiana staircase by Michelangelo, and what we discovered there is something really curious. While you think it's classical architecture, when you look twice, you suddenly realize then there are these elements, columns, pillars, pieces of walls with frames and framings, but they're not connected. They don't have a hierarchy. They all are separated and sit next to each other. There's some space between them. So what we discovered is if you put things together, just by putting them next to each other, there's a relationship, and that's really fantastic. So the singular element, it retains its power, its independence, and its dignity while it comes together with other elements without actually physically touching.
And with Michelangelo, he's a master in separating elements and working with in-between spaces, proximity, distance. I mean, the corner of the Laurentian Library where the columns disappear into darkness with a pilaster, James Ackerman wrote about it. The columns are not meeting, they are mating.
And what happens if you look at the section, this kind of constructive structure of that project, you discover what kind of hierarchy this project is about. It's crazy. You see the niche of the architectural niche with a piece of pillar starting to the left with two columns that are enshrined in that niche. Behind there's a thin wall to the main library space that's maybe only 15 or 20 meters thick. It's ridiculous. So what it is about? Is it about system, constructive purity, or is it about expression? Of course it's about expression. So the language of architecture takes over in a hierarchy. So it's about language and not about the way it's built.
There's maybe a contemporary dilemma with classical architecture and with putting a column next to a pilaster, which is a dilemma that we are also haven't solved yet, and I don't think we want to really try. No? But in contemporary art, sometimes you find ideas that help you to solve these dilemmas. So this pair we really adore. It's by Richard Archwager. It's a door and a super elegant typographical sign that could almost be the moustache of a French gentleman. And this elegance is counteracted with a door that is out of proportion, that has a painted surface that is also in a kind of awkward way. And those two things, they really work just as the pair, with an incredible energy.
So what we were looking at on the inside about the question of how do the outer windows relate to the interior windows, we discovered that if we identify them with one another, if they are actually the same, it would be better. So we took the scale of the windows from the outside to the inside of the building, and actually these pairs of openings, they have the same dimensions like the windows. So we are not talking about the difference between a kind of gentle interior texture of a building that's opposed to the kind of shell, but it's both and it's the same. We take it from outside into the building.
And you see there's the black marble columns, there is an element that mediates between, there is gaps that we consciously proportioned. And sometimes these windows are just bent. Huh? This is the one that is not load-bearing. You can see the fineness of the facade. It's a very smooth plaster, and these powder-coated metal elements, they're just kind of 1.5 centimeters sticking out. If you work with figure, there is an incredible potential to work with different scales. And we really enjoyed the kind of almost colossal order-like scale of this window motif next to this little cat sitting next to the house.
When you, this cat is guarding the house. It's small. It's like in painting when you are trying to do a Velázquez, a monumental painting of an emperor, and there's a small dog, sitting at his feet. This cat is guarding the house, but also literally he or she is guarding the house because you approach it and you touch it and you speak in his ear. And if she likes you, she would make a sound and the door will open.
She also guards the mail for you. It was a fun way to solve the problem of having a letterbox in front of a house. And it's becoming very popular and gets copied by very famous architects, which is slightly scary. And we just wanted to make a really nice homage to John Haddock, which we brutally love. But there's also little birds sitting on the house.
The next project was a competition we won for a foundation for low-cost housing in a suburb of Zurich. That's a kind of a post-war Gartenstadt / Siedlung area where there's a lot of densification going on, and you can see that the big black bars have been built in the last 5-6 years, and they're really crushing the free flow of the green space. That's the main characteristic of that area from the post-war expansion of the city. So we wanted, while we had to replace a building and do a much bigger building, we wanted to respect that spatial texture. So the figure we came up with, that you see, and it's little, it seems expressive in its form. It's not meant to be expressive. We conceive it as a series of planes, like a paravent, that's being folded, and that's demarcating a site, and at the same time, it's shaping the surrounding area. While on the north, on the upper side, it follows the little road. On the southern side and the others, it's kind of hugging spaces that are defined by beautiful trees, beautiful existing trees. So it's creating a series of exterior chambers.
What?
Exterior chambers.
Oh, exterior chambers. That's good. You never said that.
So this is partially stand-up comedy here.
Yeah, it's a bit early for that, huh? The plan, we insisted on being rectilinear, There's only very few exceptions where we had to mediate between the angled walls of the exterior with the structure of the apartments from the inside. And we kind of saw it as if you would cut out a city plan and with a kind of nice shape.
So later we discovered, that was much later, of course, we are honest about that. Later we discovered this work by Solowit, where he stayed in the city of Amsterdam and took a walk from one place to another, and at the end of the day he would connect the dots of his walk and cut out the piece. So it's really kind of the negative of what we're doing, that there are clearly competing needs in architecture. There was the need for an interior structure and the need for the exterior form, and we feel increasingly that they cannot always be easily reconciled, which harmonized in one. But in our design, we want to retain the tension between these needs and these necessities. So there's a kind of half autonomy of the parts. The facade is partially autonomous versus the plan, and vice versa.
This is a big building for its neighborhoods. The neighbors are only 2 stories high. And the composition or the structure of the facade is really quite simple. There is, on the street side, there is a central line, a horizon, made out of wood, from which there is little pilasters going up and down. Huh? This is not a tectonics that is about standing on the ground. This is the center of the building. And these pilasters, they form a rhythm, and you can see it's a free rhythm, it's not regular. And it forms also kind of compartments that are like little row houses. Huh? So there is several scales in this project. There is the big scale of the order. There is the little scale of these figural kind of little houses. And then there's another scale of plastic elements that are on the building, but also around in the surroundings, which we don't show in this image. Huh?
And of course, this tectonic of weightlessness, of having a center from which things rise and go down, it has a lot to do, and that's one example of showing this, the work by Jeff Koons, where there's a line defined by the surface of the water in which these basketball balls, they're floating. So the tectonic is not about building things up from the ground, but it's about how the eye connects a figure. So it's a perceptual tectonic, and we find that perceptual level of a tectonic is much more valuable to look at both the future of architecture and the past. And the practical reason for this was that the topography of the site would rise almost by one story to the back of the building, which you can see on the right side. So what would have happened if we would have built the building from the bottom up? It would have happened that the ground floor would start to sink into the ground. So by lifting that center of gravity, creating a central line, you would somehow solve that problem, because it doesn't matter if the line on the ground is a bit wobbly and rises.
And it also goes back to one story here on the garden facade. And you can see how you can integrate loggias within that system without destroying actually the surface quality of the building, even though they are really big holes.
And the inspiration we took for this project, clearly also while we were working, was at a first step was the Foundlings House by Brunelleschi in Florence. And we are fascinated by this project for a specific reason. You see this beautiful plaster wall that's light gray, and you see the darker architectural elements in the kind of gray Pietra Serena. And the question is it a surface with things applied on top, or is it a kind of framework of architecture in the gray lines that's being filled with the surface? And actually, there's a balance in it, incredible balance. It's both and. And we wanted to create that balance also in the kind of surface quality of the building. But then, you're doing Brunelleschi in a suburb of Zurich, come on. I mean, what's going on here, It's kind of funny because everybody there lives like we live, like flat screens and, the normal life. So a few days before the submission of the competition, a friend of us entered the studio, and he looked at a study model, and he said, "Oh, you're doing another beach house." And suddenly we realized that the Brunelleschi appearance needs to be realized with the lightness and the means of a beach house. So that's why we show the Lee Beach House by Robert Venturi. So the kind of fragility of surface, of lapping Eternit shingles and wood, the looseness of the corners would somehow allow us to speak a certain language without overpowering or humiliating the site.
And also, we really like the idea that it's the lifestyle that the building exudes is casual and happy and positive, even though it's quite a brutal building. The Eternit plates are quite big. Huh? They're I think 40 to 50 centimeters high, but 2 meters long. You see there's silver painted wood pilasters in between, but also you see they're hanging, it's the socle detail. And of course Eternit in Switzerland, it has a long tradition. Probably none of you know the beautiful houses by Lux Guyer, the architect that built a lot in the area, but also a lot of rural architecture is connected with Eternit. And the amazing Ricola by Herzog de Meuron. The plan, the client asked for a specific solution for the living, dining area. A lot of apartments being built in Switzerland at the moment is a connected space where living, dining and cooking is in one room.
And low-cost housing in Switzerland doesn't mean you can build cheaply, because the wages are very high in Switzerland, so you can't build cheaply. But what you can do, you can design apartments where more people live on the same surface, and you find smarter solutions for plans.
So the basic idea of the plan is that you enter into the kitchen. It's quite a rural thing to enter into the kitchen. It's a big kitchen distribution space, and attached to it there's a living room that you can close off and that you could also use as a bedroom. And in this kind of triumvirate of the kitchen, the living, there's also the loggia, and there's a load-bearing concrete column in the corner. And then the bedrooms and bathrooms are on the backside. And even though the shape of the building kind of generates variety, the principal idea of the apartments is throughout the same. This is this moment with this kitchen room, the column. There is different floors. There's a kind of an overlapping of this tiled floor next to the living room, so that you can bring in plants and put them here, the parquet. And there is a shadow. The column casts a shadow, two-dimensional shadow. So there's always the sun shining in this apartment, even though when it's very grey in Zurich.
And we took that idea from Johan. Is Johan in the audience? Johan Celsing.
He's skipping the lecture, but it's in the house of his father, in the entrance area. There is a shadow made out of stone. And this is a bit more brutal and poppy, I would say, and less refined and elegant. But it also serves, of course, as a threshold, no? That connects the two rooms. Oh, that just hurts my heart.
Yeah,
huh?
I know.
We lost this competition last week. Huh? Yeah. It's in Munich. It's we came in third, you know, and it's really an amazing story. So this, for the Germans, you know, and I guess like for all the other European, I mean, Switzerland has an amazing competition system, no? In Switzerland there is the possibility that as a young architect you can do public competitions, you're able to win those competitions, and when you win them you're also, it's very likely that you build them to kind of fair conditions. Huh? In Munich it's quite different. There's the city architect that selects the same kind of 12 offices for invited competitions, so it's really hard for young practices to kind of engage and build up a practice. And we have friends of ours, they decided to change that, no? So they said, fuck the system, we become the client ourselves. They founded a cooperative, it's called Kooperative Großstadt, and they bought, with subsidized money from the city of Munich, they bought a site in an area where nobody wants to live. It's Riem, München-Riem. It's where the old Messe Gelände was, and you can kind of see it here on the site plan. It's all very polite buildings, but like a lot of distance. It's quite green. It's a complete lack of urbanism and intensity, even though it's not a modern city plan. It's a kind of a contemporary city plan that is about framing the streets and but still being kind of open. So we really wanted, of course, to win this competition, but it was an open one, so it's not so easy. And yeah.
So the brief was they were very interested in the idea that's now very popular, to question the integrity of the apartment and to share certain spaces in the apartment, both out of economic necessity and as a kind of social utopia. So there were kind of three different kinds of apartment types, where you'd either share common spaces or be able to share spaces that are allocated according to your needs, to private uses. So it is quite a program.
I quickly lead through. I mean, the volume of the building was completely defined by the building law. There's no design in that. You had to follow the street, you had to build this line, you had to make this is 4 floors, this is 6 floors. and the position of the facades was all given. Huh? You can see there's a really wide street space that this facade here is prominently facing. On the ground floor they have a program, it's kind of, how do you say that in English? A workshop. Huh? It's a workshop for the people to live there, but also for the whole area. There is a cafe, library. It's kind of quite a loose situation.
A public program. Yeah.
Public program. We decided to have the kind of normal living on a core in the back side and the special living in the front side. And you will see how you can see there's a certain generic quality about halls spanning through the building, and there's another big hall inscribed in this stripy texture. It's another special program here. And then there's a beautiful little roof kitchen with a garden on the outside and lots of solar panels. For you, Tom, huh? Scully, huh? Not you. He's Irish.
Yeah, we were looking at this painting by Jean Scully, and it clearly shows a kind of cohabitation of two different sets of stripes that would be independent yet connected, that have different scales, that have a different texture, and we were looking at that both in plan and in the elevation as a main base idea.
And the interesting thing about these paintings is that the stripe is very generic, huh? But by juxtaposing of two generic ones, there's something that you could read as a figure, or at least there's a communication and a tension, and there's a fracture, and there's a lot going on. So our long street facade is, it had to accommodate loggias and glazing, so we quite cool just made our green stripes. Huh? And then when you come around the corner, there is this kind of Josephine Baker wall, huh? that connects and overlaps with this.
With a huge two-story loggia. And we were thinking about what does this utopian collective living mean? We think that it's not just about accommodating certain needs and doing kind of the mechanics of the kind of utopian age, but it's about advertising that, giving it a voice, giving it a language that is projecting outward. Because a kind of local utopia within the city becomes very problematic if it becomes a shielded private dreams of a group of citizens that would want to exclude themselves from society. But actually, we think that it should be the opposite. So it's quite, we are trying to be as aggressive as possible and as joyful as possible.
You can see that here these plates are sticking out, so it's a very fragile plasticity. It's more like leaves almost, and less like a closed surface.
And like in the Scully, it's about, the scale of housing is really defined. It's defined by the repetitive stories, it's defined by the scale of spaces of their windows. So in housing, you can immediately read. So for the collective, it sometimes becomes problematic if housing is not more than the addition of its single parts. So what we are trying to do is to create incredible jumps in scale, while the totality of the striped facade versus the singularity of the loggia, the big cut with the yellow cut, versus the kind of structural repetition of these green stripes. So this dramatic jump in scales and the juxtaposition of those scales, we thought was a good way to talk about the collective.
And you see, even though this might look quite postmodern, there's no irony in this project. Huh? Yeah. It's dead serious with a lot of humor.
And then there's the roof garden that's a bit more free. As we said before, the kind of the idea that you work with this very simple, very rigid structure, and then you insert a figure into this. This was really inspired by another example from Italy. It's the typology of the Venetian palace, in which from the main canal there's a big hall inserted into the volume of the building, which goes deep into the building. It's called the Portego, and it's connecting interior courtyard spaces. It's at the same time the main collective space within the building and the distribution space.
They wanted something that's called branch living. So those apartments here and here, they're a bit smaller than the conventional ones in the back, and that area that they lack, they gave into this big branch. So this is a 2-story room, there's a balcony here, there's a big collective kitchen, it works like a winter garden that you can open, and it's so big that it can be programmed in several ways. This is the room.
The last project.
Hang on, there's a quiz question, huh? Yeah. Are you ready for a quiz question, huh? So what do you think this building is facing? Holland. Yeah, it's actually, it's something like Holland.
Yeah, I think there's another truth to this. It's actually, Tom, you're pretty close, because it's a rational, industrialized way to talk about agriculture. So you're very close. It's the slaughterhouse that it's facing.
This house is in the last building block of Zurich. You can see here the structure from the turn of the century, the block structure. There's a really long block here that at some point just stopped. There is the slaughterhouse here with thousands of animals dying every day and with kind of quite a nasty smell from time to time. And there's the football stadium right here.
So we're looking at the heroic situation of the modern building, the edge of the city, where the city ends and the sprawl of the countryside begins with IKEA and all these, big boxes. It's the end of the city. Huh?
And it's the limit valley, so it's actually like Holland. It's very flat, but it's surrounded by mountains on both sides. Hills, not mountains. And so there's like beautiful, huge allotment gardens in the back. Huh?
So there's an ambiguous nature to this building. As you can see, it's part of an end piece. It's inside of structure. It's embedded. At the same time, it's isolated and alone. And we find that's the main characteristic of buildings today, that there may be a way of hooking up to existing structures, but in the end, you're alone.
It's also, this is literally alone, because this is always the same building from the turn of the century, then here from the 30s, quite crappy buildings, also all the same, and now there's a new extension being planned here. So it will be the only single building in the block.
The urbanistic idea that we just talked about is reflected in the section. The top stories have a bay window that pushes into the open space of the sprawl of the city, while on the 2 ground floors, there's a receding movement where an addition that's being added on the back side towards the garden is pushing towards the dense city. So there are 2 movements that are 2 urbanistic movements that are reflected in that section.
Towards the street side, we really try to be contextual, huh? We try to make a plaster building. We tried to work with vertical openings to kind of fit next to the neighbors, but it was always a huge problem. The buildings next to it would just take command of our house and would kind of take it down and make it always feel very weak and not appropriate, no? But when we decided, then we said, okay, let's just make a modern building. No, let's make some band windows, like big, direct and brutal and modern, no? From that moment on, the building had its autonomy, and it actually entered a dialogue with the neighbors, and a fruitful dialogue. There was all of a sudden, there was a distance between them, but it was like a bit like on a party when you meet people that are different than you, but you can still be polite with each other and have a good conversation.
our two big brothers we were looking at, or the two absent friends, as we say sometimes. They were Le Corbusier's building at the Porte Molitor in Paris, where he, as you know, he lived on the top floor, and the Palazzo Rucellai by Alberti in Florence. It's a strange pair, isn't it? But the reason why we have looked at them is that it's very obvious in the case of the Porte Molitor immeuble, because it has a texturedness of frames and fillings, and there's an incredible development from the bottom to the top, a transformation of figure where you are not able to read where the base of the building begins and where the proper building is starting. So the base could be 1 story, it could be 3 stories. There's an overlapping of kind of figures over the height of the building. While we were looking at the Palazzo Rucellai for a different reason, the Palazzo Rucellai consists, you all know that it's mainly only a facade. Rucellai, he bought up a few houses, and he had Alberti do a new facade. He tried to buy more houses to make it bigger, and never happened. So it's a facade project. But what he did is he used the classical orders like horizontals, verticals, and pillars, but at the same time, he was talking about the wall. He did a rustication of the wall. So is it wall architecture, or is it the architecture of order? In fact, he collapsed both of them in the same plane. You can see that the rustication casts basically the same shadows like the classical order. So it was clear that it was not about a hierarchy of these two elements, but about doing two things at the same time. It was about the architecture resides in this relief and in form, and all things come together.
So this is a rusticated facade with band windows, but it's also a ventilated facade. These are glass fiber cement panels. They're 16 millimeters thick, and the rustication is another 16 millimeters. So there's no idea of weight and mass. This is more like a helmet or a thin armor. And the back facade is a cheaper facade. It's an outer insulation, but also here the question of volume and planes was crucial in development. So you can see that this is a facade with a different render, with a different motif than this facade. There is a joint, an artificial gap that separates these into plates and not into kind of a mass that is stuccoed. And
in principle, this project is about, spending your money on the front facade and doing a rather cheap back facade. So that was the strategy that was used all over the world for most of the time of history, to create a kind of an intensity on the street side and a kind of decorum by being quite simple on the courtyard side.
When you do a band window, there's the problem of how you solve the structure into the facade, and we were happy to engage with the idea of the plan libre if it's a modern building. No? I guess it's a different plan libre than you would see in Corp or with Mies, because for Corp the plan libre was interesting that every floor could be different. No? But he almost didn't care about the columns, and with Mies it's even worse. No? He tried to make the columns disappear. But here we engaged, we thought it's great to use the columns in order to structure space. And the way they're set is almost in an urbanistic way. You can see that they're parallel here to the main facade, kind of giving a stop to the space coming from the outside, or giving a hold on the inside and establishing this layer of space.
It's like the space from that open plane, from the sprawling plane, flooding into the main facade. No? It's a very different experience than from the courtyard side, where it's really protected.
And in the depth of the building, we turned the pillars and made them also substantially thicker, and they form kind of a rhythm of this long, free-floating space. At the same time, it's also a cellular plan. Now you can have all the doors open, and you can see there's a kind of connection through this apartment figure with the bathroom, the dressing room, and the main bedroom. You can really walk through the building in different ways. But when you close the doors, it's a normal cellular plan. And
as you can see, the plan is, in principle, it's symmetrical. There's a central staircase, and there, against the firewalls on the left, on the right, they're kind of apartment figures. There's the main bedroom with a wardrobe and a way along that wall leading through a larger bathroom to the other side of the building. And these are 2 apartment figures. But in the end, you can see that while these elements are strictly symmetrical, the plan is not, because we have put the living room figure with that one room to the street side, not in a symmetrical fashion, but we put it in a series, like not A, B, B, A, but A, B, A, B. So the result is that the figure of the living room, which is composed of the kitchen area and the living room area, is diagonal, and the diagonals are parallel. It has to do with orientation first. There's the light is coming from here where I stand. So there's a kind of ping pong, like a reflective idea about the light leading in from that side, while that right side is less privileged, so it has a more direct access to the light and the view. But of course, it's also about the plan not avoiding a kind of stupid symmetry, because they are intelligent symmetries and they are stupid symmetries. Stupid symmetries create centers that make no sense. If you do a symmetry, a strict symmetry, there's a dividing wall in the middle and a staircase, which is really not the main theme of the building.
Yeah, whenever I look at a core project, I have to think of my studies at ETH, where core was taught in a very dogmatic way, you know, the 5 points.
Ollie was traumatized.
I was traumatized, and it was like friends from the US and also Thomas that kind of, and also Colin Rowe that kind of helped me to actually engage with Corp in a different way, you know? And yeah, we should skip the reference, huh?
Yeah, let's just go.
It's too complicated. It's about the layers, you know. When you read Colin Rowe, he talks with Slutsky, he talks about the transparency of Corp's plan, that he establishes layers of space within the rhythm of the columns. And these columns, for instance, are not drawn in the over-complete plans, huh? But then Rowe unearths them. And this idea of transparency was also important in our plan, no? But you see maybe in the images this better. There are high rooms, they're 2.85 meters, huh? Because we had a maximum allowance, but we're not only allowed to have 4 floors. Here you can kind of see a moment where a wooden board disguises where the window hits the ceiling, a cupboard covers the corner to the next room, and all of a sudden the spatial experience becomes very flat and everything seems to collapse on the same plane.
And also we talking about the singularity of things, you know, when you do plumbing, you know, sometimes you end up with very funny shafts, you know, that are kind of standing in the way, you know. Instead of suppressing them and hiding them, we integrated them somehow into a series of planes and a relief in the bathroom, where mirrors and storage spaces would somehow all have their own value in creating a kind of confusing set of relief figures. And the problem, you know, we realized that very late in the project, but we said, okay, it's good, let's do the band facade on the street side, and let's do the punch windows, the kind of mural facade on the courtyard side. But then think about the interior. If it's one space that goes through, you know, is it just, you know, you look at a wall from one side and you look at a band window from the other side? Does that really work? So what we did is we took the idea of the band window with not a kind of cut out, a negative operation, but a compositional one. We took that into the depth of the space to the interior side of the courtyard facade. So instead of showing a wall, you could do that simply as a wall with a window and the door punched out. We cut this wall into pieces and created a relief. We put a pillar that nobody needed into that wall. We did a kind of lintel that recedes. So in the end, it's a series of a relief of rectangular elements that has the same interior tectonic like the front facade. So basically, the thinking of the front facade goes deep into the space and arrives only, it stops only on the inside of the back facade.
When we say this is a modern building, we didn't think of the Mediterranean modernism, the white modernism. We thought of the dark modernism of Russia, of the constructivists, of Ivan Leonidov. We loved the fact that this rubber floor is as dark as the asphalt from outside, and then there's a continuity of the street continuing through the whole staircase, and white elements are kind of flashing out in the darkness of the stairs.
And when we also thought about this building as a classical building. But when we thought about it as a classical building, we didn't think about Athens. We thought about Sparta.
So we talked about that these are really thin plates. They're hanging. There is no attempt to try to make them volumetric. The side reveals of these elements are made out of metal, as well as the window sills. And you see there's joints and there is air that goes under. There's also big kind of artificial joints. But what we needed in order to make everything coming together and for the eye glue the things together again is that everything has the same color. It's a bit like the Renaissance building, like the Rucellai.
Yet the elements have their independence. There's space between the doors, the different doors for the entrance, the garbage, the bicycles, all these things.
This is a little project we did for an exhibition that was about maximization of building laws in the year 2046.
It's a simple operation of a couple of volumes that are put together. There's a grid covering it.
I got it now, Thomas. It's a figure, yet it's abstract.
That's a poem.
It's a poem, yeah. It's composed. There's a grid covering the whole surface, yet it's disconnected, leaving those surfaces independent. And even though the volumetric operation to create this thing was very simple, it looks different from every side. Thank you very much.
Thank you.